South Africa's higher education sector reached a capacity wall as record-breaking matric results collided with stagnant physical infrastructure. Following the historic 88% pass rate of the class of 2025, over 656,000 learners successfully passed matric, yet the country's 26 public universities can only accommodate approximately 235,000 first-year students. This disparity has left hundreds of thousands of qualifying students without a seat, prompting urgent calls from the Department of Higher Education and Training for institutions to pivot toward fully online and hybrid learning models. Let's unpack the scale of the problem with Professor Mlamuli Hlatshwayo from the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, University's South Africa CEO, and Busisiwe Sibizo, a PhD candidate whose research centers on full integration of online education. A very good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll start with you, Prof, since you are with us in studio. Maybe let's just get to how we got here. How is it that we've got so many young people who are looking to have a seat at a university, however, our infrastructure is not efficient and sufficient for them to be there?
Absolutely a good question. I mean, this is the crisis that we are facing because invariably in this country, there seems to be an idea that the only pathway to the middle class and to upward social mobility is the university system. So you've got a bunch of students learners rather, who when they matriculate, the first thing they think about is going to university to try and improve their lives for themselves, their families, and things like that. So it's a much more critique of the state and the inability of our government, unfortunately, to create multiple pathways that can enable learners and really the youth in this country to be able to achieve the dream beyond the university and outside of the university. So it's essentially that frustration where the public universities essentially become the only gateway that we are facing. There's no looking at the TVET sector. There's no looking at the community college. There's no looking at skills. And the teachers and others who are doing a fantastic job. It's only the university that is seen essentially as a panacea to all the challenges that we are facing.
And Dr. Phethiwe, let's bring you in there just on that very point. I mean, how do we move away from the mindset that universities are the only pathway for young people to come out of poverty? As Prof has alluded, I mean, we've got TVET colleges and CETAs that are doing a lot of work that allows for students to gain the same amount of skills in order for them to find a job in some kind of placement.
I wish that was the main issue. The reality is that TVET colleges are full. They've had to close their systems. We have children who are at homes who do not have the opportunities to get into the TVET colleges. So it's not just about universities. It's about the post-school education sector holistically, which is starting to get to be full to the brim and leaving some of the potential students at home.
Busisiwe, you wrote your research in digital policy studies, and it's titled Bridging the Digital Divide, Exploring the Integration of South African Indigenous Languages in ICT for Economic Growth. Just speak to us about the change in mindset that students perhaps would need to have if there is an introduction of being fully integrated in the digital space in order for them to be able to still acquire the same skills and learning, and as opposed to being physically in a classroom?
Thank you for that question. I think students will need to open up to this digital system because I think most of them fear being fully digital. It's because of different reasons, your digital divide, your fear of using these digital tools, because they keep on updating every now and then. You can't keep up with the digital technologies. So I think learning outside of the university space, making sure that you open yourself to these tools and teach yourself the different skills that are needed, teach yourself the different things that are needed, and just be open to it. Because I think the fear of it is also another issue that's making us not fully integrate, besides the digital divide and so forth. So I think if we open ourselves to this digital space and accept that we're now moving to a digital industry, a digital country or whatsoever, then I think that would help a lot.
Prof, what do you think needs to be done for South African universities to then adapt to increasing the demand for online and hybrid learning?
I think they're already doing that. To give credit to our 26 public universities in the country, UJ, UNISA, quite a few, I think Northwest University at the moment, quite a few of our universities are leading this almost hybrid. I think very few of them are still traditional teaching and learning, bums on the seats, and that's the only teaching mode of delivery that they are. I think the better question to be looking at is, what are some of the resources, capacities, and others to enhance that hybrid model that they are dealing? Certainly, needs to come to the party. The funding of our public universities remains declining in real terms, if you look. I think we've lost about 2% of our funding in real terms. The second part is the institutional differentiation. In other words, the inequalities across our 26 public universities, we cannot escape that. For example, UCT is not Forte, right? We know that UP is not the University of Zululand, and you know that UJ is not the University of Venda, right? So I think we need to be much more deliberate and intentional about the inequalities in the sector, and to come up with additional funding ways of making sure that the curriculum experience, the teaching and learning experience, remains equitable across the different universities that we are facing. Because universities are already doing that. Assignments are submitted online, tests are being done online, assessments are being done online. So what additional buffers of funding can we potentially unlock so that we can make sure not only do we rev that up, but also we try to mitigate against the growing inequality within these public universities themselves?
All right, so let's just hold the conversation there and go for a quick ad break. But when we do come back, we'll continue with this conversation with regards to placing more students in our institutions as opposed to them attending physically, because we are seeing that those numbers are fast outgrowing the infrastructure that we have in the country. Do stay with us. This conversation, maybe what I will divert to is just a little bit on Busisiwe's research, and just looking particularly in indigenous languages in ICT and how we accommodate students in rural areas, and then we'll close off the conversation thereafter. Thank you. Welcome back. We are joined by Professor Mlamuli Hlatshwayo from the University of Johannesburg, Dr. Phethiwe Matutu, University's South Africa CEO, and Busisiwe Sibizo, a PhD candidate whose research centers on full integration of online education. We are having that conversation about universities battling to absorb the record number of eligible matriculants to sit within those universities and attain the qualifications that they're looking for. Dr. Matutu, what would you say are the most urgent reforms that we need as a country to address this problem, and how can online and hybrid learning models be scaled effectively across different types of institutions? I mean, we heard Prof there speaking about the various inequalities and the funding issues that many of the universities face.
Most urgent issue is that before we get into the system, we would have properly investigated it in terms of policy, because right now, UNISA is the main university which is supposed to offer the distance learning. And there is policy which is prohibiting other institutions from growing in that front. Then the second element is to properly study the effectiveness of the virtual and online hybrid and online studies for students who are coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds, so that we have an idea of the kind of animal that we would have to be dealing with if students are sitting at home instead of being at the appropriate places with Wi-Fi and so on. So the CHE, which is the Council on Higher Education, is trying to understand this and its effect on the current funding framework that we have as a country, which looks at the current policy framework that we have. So that is another component. And of course, Busisiwe has stated the attitudes of students towards that kind of learning, which is fully online, or the hybrid one is being offered. UJ has come up with a very lovely innovation, which I think I appreciate. What is holding universities largely are the resources from the government. So they have come up with some online courses which are not subsidized by government, whose students will not be funded by NSFAS. So they more or less take off these groups of students from the whole government kind of subsidy, where government is saying they are short of funds in order to support the full online learning. So I think as universities try and test this and its effectiveness, it's possible that they can grow, but at the core, it's not just about space, it's not just about attitudes, it's also about government funding, which is limited in terms of subsidies and limited in terms of NSFAS, and of course limited in terms of infrastructure accommodation, while servicing the poorest of the poor in areas which do not even have connectivity.
You touched, Doc, with regards to a policy that's prohibiting other institutions from operating as distance learning institutions, very much like UNISA. Maybe just unpack that a little for us with regards to the barriers that then poses for these other institutions.
So the department has got an enrollment plan which assists universities in terms of planning, and on the basis of those plans, they agree on how many students can be funded in various programs. So that is based on their capacity in terms of infrastructure, in terms of staffing, and also on government's capacity in terms of subsidizing those students, and also availability of funding through NSFAS. So they are requested not to grow by more than 5% at any given time because they are understood to be, I would say, physical or contact universities versus UNISA, which is distance. So I think it's trying to prevent universities to be uniform, so to speak.
No, I understand you. So Busisiwe, your research is quite interesting in that it focuses on indigenous languages in ICT economic growth. How can this integration promote greater digital inclusion, especially for students that may be sitting in rural areas?
So with regards to that, I think integration of South African indigenous languages would be effective, because I was a tutor at UJ, and when you tutor students, especially from townships and rural areas, they prefer you to tutor in isiZulu or isiXhosa because they cannot fully understand English because of the language barrier, which is now an issue because you can't tutor in isiZulu or isiXhosa when you have a class which has different students from different tribes and so forth. So I think the integration of the South African languages will help students understand fully the digital system and the digital tools, because sometimes it's not that they cannot use those tools, but they are blocked because they don't understand these tools. So I think once we integrate these languages, we integrate all languages, and then students can learn within their comfort, which is using their languages, and it would increase the chances of performing well and getting the best results in school.
And Prof, how would that then translate into the workplace? So if one is doing a specialized skill in an indigenous language, and we find that many of our workplaces still operate primarily in English, Would there be a barrier there?
Absolutely, and I think that's why when we speak about transformation, it's almost very limited to speak about transforming the higher education sector. I think it has to be a much more societal project. It has to be a multi-stakeholder project, because only focusing on the university and capacitating the students and promoting translanguaging, multilingualism and all those other things, and then finding that the corporate sector and the private sector, they're not interested in that. And then that introduces the additional barriers of limitation. So definitely the private sector needs to come to the party. Dr. Matutu is correct. Government needs to start heavily funding some of these projects so that at least we're able not just to theorize, but we're able to upskill and intellectualize these languages so they can be applied and enacted, and we can code in our own indigenous languages, we can create business plans and all those other things. So I think for me, the future is endless, but we need a multi-stakeholder approach to be able to support each other.
And are we limiting ourselves if we're saying that even if we're transforming the workplace with regards to our indigenous languages, then that closes us out from being a global player because of that language barrier?
Absolutely not. The reason Chinese universities are leading at the moment is because they learn mathematics and other languages in their own indigenous languages. So they don't speak about factorization, they don't speak about Pythagoras and all those other things. They use their own language and they use their own agricultural tools and terms that learners and kids are familiar with to bring them to the classroom and to theorize them and then to make the mathematics language accessible, right? So I think colleagues have done an amazing job in our public universities. I'm thinking of colleagues at Rose, like Professor Spogazi Makadla and others, who are creating assessments and questions and theories ngeXhosa, right? And asking those questions and enabling students to pass ngeXhosa and others. Colleagues are doing the same thing at UKZN, Northwest and others. So there is space for that kind of work, but I think it just needs to be properly supported so that we can be able to compete. Because think about it, as a child in Soweto, I had to grow up learning isiZulu, isiXhosa, isiSwati. By the time I get access to English, it's already my 4th or 5th language. So now you need to think and you need to translate and you need to do all those mental jump 4 times, 5 times before you can have access to reason. By the time you're able to read and write and engage, it's already quite late. So our Chinese students, our Indian students and others, including Arabic learners in Qatar and others, are not engaging in those kinds of debate. They are able to take language and multilingualism and the rich linguistic resources that we have in this country. They're able to theorize it and develop it and create tools and concepts that allows their own learners to have access to these different terms. And I think that's what the future ought to look like.
Dr. Matutu, when we speak about the infrastructure and just the limited access to funding, especially that which you mentioned from government, what role do you think the private sector needs to play in terms of partnerships and expanding that access and enhancing the digital infrastructure in our higher education?
Yeah, the private sector, they are the major beneficiary of human capital in our country. So in that sense, it's important, firstly, for them to hook in and be part of the problem, the part of the universities, be it through particular disciplines or areas that they have an interest in. And they are, in fact, doing that and focused in the development of those areas, particularly at the researcher level. So in terms of the infrastructure in the rural areas, I do think that government can partner with the private sector to ensure that we have access. We have proven that at university level, our universities are fully connected, and it's a matter of taking advantage of that connection fully as universities. So I do think that the private sector, they can do a lot to support the students.
Right.
And they do. Training courses, they do that, free online courses, Microsoft, this, that. We've partnered with IBM to look at our gaps. So there's a lot that they do already, but I do think that in partnership with government, ensuring that there is appropriate network at the various areas in South Africa. Yes.
Busi, how do you see the digital literacy being enhanced, particularly in indigenous communities, to bridge the digital divide?
Could you please repeat the question, sorry?
Just with regards to digital literacy, how do you think it can be improved and enhanced in indigenous communities for us to bridge that divide?
Oh, okay. So I think if back to government funding, if government could fund spaces in these indigenous communities that will be fully focused on digital literacy, that could work, because when you stay in townships or rural areas, you don't have access to spaces that have digital tools, and you don't know how to use those tools. So I think if we can invest in spaces, digital hubs where learners and students will be taught how to use the digital tools, that could help. Because now you only have access to a library, and a library is far. You need to catch a taxi to get to the library. So I think investing more in the spaces, and also ensuring that once the spaces are created, everyone gets access and they are being taught by professionals in the digital space, that could work.
Lastly, Prof, I mean, if there are matriculants that are sitting at home that didn't find any placements or space, either at TVET college or at a university, and they're not looking to take a gap year, because sometimes that can really veer you off completely with regards to what you want as a goal in going into a university and studying. What advice would you have for them? What practical steps can they take to keep themselves in the system and maybe perhaps find placement in the next year?
Absolutely. But I think the first one is to deal with the psychosocial issues.
Yes.
Don't get disillusioned. Don't get discouraged. Don't start thinking my life is over. I need to kill myself and everything like that. So I think it's very, very important to start with where you started, to simply reiterate that universities have received over 600 to 700,000 applications, and we only have space for less than 200K. So it's not a me problem. It's not an individual problem. It's a sector-wide problem, and that there is fundamentally nothing wrong with you. So I think we need to reiterate that, so that we don't have rising suicide rates, anxiety, depression, and all those other challenges that we seem to be facing, especially amongst young black men in this country. So that's the first one. The second one, I think your community college, your TVETs and your SETAs, they play a beautiful role. And I want to reiterate SETAs. The budgetary allocation, if I'm not mistaken, from the previous financial year with SETAs was around 20.1 billion, right? So we have about 21 different SETAs in this country. The learnerships, the internships, the funding from the hospitality industry to the farming to agriculture to things like that. I'd really implore our own learners to start taking seriously some of these SETAs, to have a look at their website, to go, as Busisiwe was saying, to the library, research as much as you can, so that they can see what valuable opportunities are available out there. I do want to reiterate as well that there are some TVETs that still have some space, and they are accepting admissions as well. I know they wanted to get to a university, and the stigma is that, you know, TVETs are the stepchild of our post-schooling sector. So please, they are not devalued. We do have quite functioning TVETs in this country that are doing quite valuable work. And the beauty with the TVET is the applied knowledge that you get there is not just theoretical knowledge that you get from sitting in the classroom. 6 months portion of that curricula, you have to go to industry, you have to get practical skills and things like that. And that often helps you to be able to get a job, to create your own job, to open a business and things like that. So those are some of the things that are practical, that are strongly implored. But I cannot overemphasize the psychosocial one, because that is the fear that we are facing in this country, the suicide amongst our young children, where they feel like, because I didn't get to university, I didn't pass well, so therefore my life is over. So we definitely need some targeted support there.
And while we're speaking about the psychosocial support that's needed, it's also the awareness and the education that needs to be given to parents, because they apply that pressure in saying, but you have to sit in a university.
Absolutely. Because remember, you are dealing with parents who themselves may not have gone to university. Hence, in education, we call these first-generation students, right? The first in their family to go to university, not graduate, to go, like to enter the gates and things like that. So the kind of support that is required, both mentally, economically, psychosocially, and things like that, it's not there. So you've got parents who are really thinking, this is the child that's going to make a meaningful difference in this house. This is the child, Ozowake Makaya, and things like that. So they are well-meaning in their intention to say, go to university so that your life can get a little bit better and things like that. Parents may not have access to the TVET sector, the community college, the SETAs, volunteering and things like that. All those things, for me, they do make a difference. Even though you may not have gotten into university, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. There are other practical ways where you can volunteer your time, you can register online on the SETA, you can have a look at the NYDA and see some of the non-financial support that are being offered, so that at least you can upskill yourself while waiting for the 2027 academic year.
Most certainly. Prof. Doc Busi, thank you so much for your time and for your contribution